Check, 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 check. Check 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Museum of Glass here in Tacoma. With us today, our visiting artist, sitting in the bench right there with the long sleeves, is Mr. Nick Mount. Nick was amongst the first generation of artists to be introduced to the art glass movement in Australia in the early 70s. He's grounded in the historic and cultural traditions of Venetian glass. Mount's work tells a uniquely Australian story. It's a story of partnership and persistence, industry and innovation, experimentation and growth. He has a reputation for being a very generous mentor. And in a career spanning almost 50 years, Mount has made significant contributions to the development of the studio glass and artistic medium in Australia, and is celebrated as a master of his class. We'd also like to give a special thank you from the museum to the sponsors of this residency, Ms. Phyllis Griggs and Laylee Warehouser. Again, our visiting artist, Nick Mount, was selected as a candidate from the Fuel the Fire program to create here in the Hot Shop this week. I was hoping I didn't lie to you when I told you to come back in 10 minutes. All right, folks, to give you kind of a little laydown of what we have going on in the Hot Shop in front of you. On the right-hand side, in the black shirt, we have Mr. Gabe Feenan. He's working on assembling a tray of glass mosaic that they're going to later on throw into the rewarming chamber, get it nice and hot so it's all sticky together. Here in the center, we have Ben Cobb. Again, Nick Mount is in the hot seat. And we have another resident studio artist here on the right-hand side, Nick. Directly in front of that bench, you'll see Nick get up from time to time and push that hot glass into that chamber. That chamber is known as a G-hole, glory hole, or a rewarming station. It operates at about 2,300 degrees. Gets that glass nice and hot. And then off to the right-hand side of that G-hole, you have a large crucible. We have two of them here on the hot shop floor, one on the left, one on the right. We'll be working out of the one on the right today. Each one of those crucibles holds 1,000 pounds of molten glass at 2,100 degrees, 24 hours a day. You think back to the pandemic, when the museum was closed, the furnaces were still running. It's very important to keep that glass from turning solid inside those crucibles, because it will crack and run out onto the floor, ruin everything that we've got. Notice Ben is going in. He's getting a gather of hot clear glass around the outside of that form that they've been working on. And what he's doing now is he's doing what's called a strip gather. He's basically letting all of the excess clear glass run off the end of that pipe into a bucket of water, leaving a much thinner layer of clear between you and the mosaic underneath. And from time to time, when that blowpipe gets really hot, in order to preserve the sensors in our fingers, we have to run it through the pipe cooler over there, bring it down to a reasonable temperature. We can get closer to the object, the cooler the pipe is, which makes it easier in the long term. If you're working with a large piece of glass hanging off the end, the closer you can get to that pivot point, the lighter the load feels. Again, back into that rewarming chamber, get it nice and hot. Blow this form out a little bit more. Yep. Okay, so what he used was a tool called the block. Yeah. Okay, that block is made out of a very fine-grained, usually fruit wood, cherry, apple, something like that. So it holds the shape as best it can. They soak it in the water so that when it comes in contact with the hot glass, it creates a layer of steam in between the glass and the wood itself, keeping the artist from leaving the shape of the wood in the glass. So it gives it a little bit of a barrier, and it allows it to form that nice, really glassy finish instead of some of the wavy stuff like you'll see on the bottom of your canning jars or things. It's not real smooth. It's because it cooled on another object. So when we do these color pickups, it starts, if you can see down here, it'll start on a piece of, I lost the word. It'll start on a kiln shelf. It's got some dust coating on it so the glass doesn't stick. You can see they're individual pieces. And when they put them into the rewarming chamber, it essentially creates a tube. There's no closure on the end. So what they're doing now is closing that end so the color comes completely around the object. There isn't going to be a gap in the top. So they clip that off and they leave it on the floor. It cools down, goes into the bucket at the end of the day. And then back into the rewarming chamber to make sure that that seal at the top is nice and tight. And they can blow that object out when it gets hot and liquidy. You noticed that Ben sat here in the center chair letting that bubble set up for a good amount of time. The reason he's doing that is to let the center form set up a little bit before they go back into the crucible and gather another layer of hot glass. Letting that center portion set up allows you to gather the glass on the outside without the threat of the bubble collapsing from the weight of all the new glass on top of it. So they set it up, or they blew it out, they let the bubble set, then they went in, did another strip gather, and they'll get back to the bench and start forming this thing up. And for those of you who are wondering, it looks like he's got a pad of hot paper there. That's exactly what that is. It's newspaper soaked in water, and that allows the glass artist to selectively cool areas of the glass that he wants or she wants to set up. That way, when they apply pressure on the inside, blowing things out, it'll blow up in a particular way. But again, sitting, letting the form cool down, set up a little bit before they go back in for some more glass. Back into that crucible for another layer of clear glass. We'll see if he does another strip gather into that clear or that silver bucket next to him. There we go. So one of the other questions that we get asked a lot is about the glass in our buckets. What do we do with that? Does that just go straight into the garbage or no? As long as the glass has not touched the floor, hasn't been contaminated in any way, we can take that glass straight out of the bucket and throw it back into our crucible. We try to minimize as much loss as possible. Shaping up that form again using the wooden tool called the block. And back into the rewarming chamber. Again, 2,300 degrees. You just watch Ben give that form an all-over blast with what we like to call the fluffy torch. He's trying to keep the surface of that object as evenly heated as possible. One of the most important parts of the glass blowing process is to make sure that that connection point between the blowpipe and the glass object itself stays above 1,000 degrees. If it drops below that threshold, you run the risk of having that connection point crack and then losing everything off the end of the blowpipe. So you'll see them from time to time, in addition to going back into the chamber, they will use that fluffy torch there at the bench to keep things nice and hot, a little bit longer working time before having to go back into the reheat. You see the artist is giving a little bit of a downward tilt on that blowpipe, using the force of gravity to help elongate the form, draw it out into something closer to what they need as they shape this bust up. You see Ben there at the bench. He's putting in what we call a jack line, that metal tool that he's got in his right hand. Those are called the jacks. And he's putting in a small constriction point, which will be used later on as the location where we separate that form from the blowpipe. Again, back to the papers, blowing that object out a little bit more, selectively cooling it, refining that jack line, and then back into the rewarming chamber. back into that 2300 degree rewarming chamber. Add a little bit more heat to the object. Keep it nice and soft so they can continue to draw the form out into that oblong oval shape. Again, using the force of gravity to help us out. Why struggle when you don't have to? And then back to the papers to shape and draw that, that bubble out a little bit further. So folks, we've had kind of a nebulous shape there on the end of that blowpipe up until now. We're actually putting some hard edges and really applying some pressure, bending this glass to our will. Again, I said during my discussion this morning, I talked with Nick, and what they're making here is a couple of busts. This appears to be the head of the bust. We'll get to the shoulders in a little bit. And now we got that crown formed back into the rewarming chamber. Make sure that that moil, that connection point to the blowpipe, stays nice and warm. Making sure it doesn't crack, keeping all of our hard work there at the end of the pipe so we can continue to shape it up. Again, back to the fluffy torch, paying very close attention to that connection point between the glass pipe and our glass form, making sure that it stays above that 1,000-degree threshold, keep it from cracking and losing all of our work. Going to heat that moil up, and then they're going to get back into the rewarming chamber for another all-over heat. We'll call it a flash. And then that object will come back to the bench for some more shaping. For those of you who are just joining us in the hot shop today, our visiting artist is Nick Mount. Nick is one of the preeminent glass artists there in Australia. He was among the first generation of artists in the country in the early 1970s, grounded in the historic and cultural traditions of Venetian glass. His work tells a uniquely Australian story. It's a story of partnership and persistence, industry and innovation, experimentation and growth. He has a reputation for being a generous mentor. And in a career spanning almost 50 years, Nick has made significant contribution to the development of studio glass as an artistic medium in Australia and is celebrated as a master of his craft. We'd also like to give a thank you to the residency sponsors, Phyllis Griggs and Laylee Warehouser, for allowing Nick to come to the studio with us this week. All right, so you notice that tool that Ben is using right there. That is a tungsten rod. The reason they use tungsten is because glass does not stick to it very easily. And they can get it up to a very high working temperature to allow us to open up these glass forms. Right now we're putting in a hole in the base of this object so that then we can switch our blowpipe from one end to the other and continue to shape up the object. That little torch that he's working with right there, you know, just to give you some context to the amount of heat coming out of that. 2,300 degrees in our warming chambers, and the small torch is about 5,000 degrees when it's fully going. You see again here in the center bench, using that fluffy torch to keep our connection point nice and warm. And off to the left-hand side of the studio, You have Gabe working on a new blowpipe that they're going to attach to the opposite end of this object we're working on now. And then using a trick of physics and just a little bit of magic, we'll use water to separate or create a temperature differential in that glass and crack it and allow us to transfer that object to our other blowpipe. You can hear the dialogue back and forth between the two benches, making sure they've got their timing right so that both objects are hot and ready at the same time. They'll come back and finish that punty transfer here at the center bench in a minute. All right, hot glass will stick to hot glass. I'm going to shape it up just a little bit more. Apply a little bit more heat to it. Get them both up to a proper working temperature, and they'll come back to the bench and they'll stick those end to end. You notice as they get ready to do that, Ben will reach behind him and get a little bit of water on one of those tools and apply it to that choke point there at the end of his blowpipe. That will create some small surface cracks, and tapping the pipe with another metal object afterward will enable those surface cracks to go all the way through the object, separating it and leaving it on the other pipe. Making sure everything's on center so it turns properly. Use some air to cool down that connection point, make sure it's a little stronger. And here we go with the water. Tap it away. Then Gabe goes back into that rewarming chamber, get the end that they have just knocked away up to a nice working temperature. It has been the last thing in and the first thing out since we've been working on it. We've inverted the piece now and we're going to work on the opposite end. I'm going to open up this bubble just a little bit and continue working. You see Ben really applying some significant pressure, using those jacks to close off this bubble. Once we get that closed off, we're going to get it back into the rewarming chambers. Make it nice and soft. That way we can continue to blow the bubble form up as it comes back to the bench. Again, using those papers soaked in water to selectively cool areas of that bubble as he shapes it, forms it, and draws it out a little bit longer. Using that fluffy torch again to keep the outside of that object nice and hot. And back into the rewarming chamber for an all-over heat. We're going to call it a flash. And as he stands in front of that rewarming chamber, you can picture it kind of acting like a blowtorch. All of the heat from inside is being focused right at the very end. We're really going to bring it back to the bench and put a nice hard edge on it, flatten it up, and continue to shape it. You notice Gabe is in there with that paddle. He's applying a little bit of pressure to the end of that bubble to flatten it up. And you use that hot torch again to really make the end of that object nice and soft so they can get as distinct a corner, I guess, as they can get. In order to do that, they have to make the glass really hot so it'll form in between those two objects, the tools that they're working with. Again, remember, they go into that rewarming chamber to get an all overheat, keep the glass above 1,000 degrees. And then they focus the heat of that rewarming chamber right at the very end, since that's the next area that they're going to be working. A little bit of artist collaboration sitting here at the bench, talking about the application of what is going to become the headphones for this bust. Back into the rewarming chamber and then back to the table to continue shaping. We've gone back to that hot torch. Remember, 5,000 degrees on that hot torch. And he's also got that tungsten rod. He's putting a couple of holes, one on either side. We'll be able to see where we're going to attach those headphones once they get those made. Again, the reason that they're using that tungsten rod is because that gets super hot and the glass does not stick to it. Allows us to put those holes all the way through without sticking things together and gumming it up. Then back into the rewarming chamber. Again, 2,300 degrees, get that all over heat. Keep it at a nice working temperature. Back into the rewarming chamber. Keep the outside of that piece of glass nice and hot and workable. On the left-hand side of the studio, you'll see Nick Davis working with that big silver box. That silver box is called our garage. And not unlike our garage back home, it's where we stick all of our spare parts. In this particular instance, they've made a couple of headphone forms, and they're currently in the garage warming up, coming up to a workable temperature, knowing that only hot glass will stick to hot glass. They've got to get it up to the right place. Now they're going to bring that headphone to the table. Ben's got it in hand. They're going to heat it up using the hot torch, and then when Gabe comes out of the chamber back to the bench, they'll stick that headphone to the side of our head. All right, we've got one side successfully attached. Going to get back into that rewarming chamber. Again, keeping that all over heat. Keeping our connection point above 1,000 degrees so it doesn't crack. And we've got Nick again back at the garage on the left-hand side, moving things around, getting ready for our second headphone form that's going to come out and be placed on the opposite side of this piece. Once again, using that tungsten rod and that hot torch, you create a small hole, giving us a place to identify the attachment point for that headphone as it gets ready to be put on the other side. Back to the rewarming chamber to get an all-over heat. And now begins the work of getting these pieces up to heat at the same time so that they'll stick together. Really focusing that 5,000 degree torch on that area of the form, making it nice and hot and sticky. So when we pull that other headphone out, we can stick it right to the side and have no problems. One more all over heat on both sides, and they're going to bring them to the center bench and get them both stuck together. There you go, folks. Hot glass sticks to hot glass. We got both of those headphones attached. Now back into the rewarming chamber, getting all over heat. Get everything up to a uniform temperature. They continue working it and finalize our form. Folks, for those of you who are just joining us in the hot shop, our visiting artist this week is Mr. Nick Mount. He's among the first generation of artists to be introduced to the art glass movement in Australia in the early 70s. He's grounded in historic and cultural traditions of Venetian glass. Mount's work tells a uniquely Australian story. It's a story of partnership and persistence, industry and innovation, experimentation and growth. He has a reputation for being a generous mentor. And in a career spanning almost 50 years, Mount has made significant contribution to the development of the studio glass movement in Australia and is celebrated as a master of his craft. We'd also like to thank the sponsors, Phyllis Griggs and Laylee Warehouser, for making it possible for Nick to be in the studio with us this week. You can see Ben there really working the end of that form, getting rid of that excess glass. Have to tease it off just a little bit at a time, and then we can take it off in one fell swoop. Doing that will help us to not only create a much more secure join when the next piece comes out and they put it together, but it also cuts down on the amount of time that it will take in the cold shop to cut and polish and finish the glass form when it's done. using that MAP gas torch to apply some very specific heat to a very tiny location, really refining that, that hole at the top of that form there. Nick has taken the object back into the rewarming chamber. If you remember, that's 2,300 degrees. It runs the whole time we're here in the studio. We turn it off at night. Conversely, on the outside of that rewarming chamber, we also have 2 crucibles. Each one of our crucibles will hold 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees, 24/7. And the way that thing runs is with forced air and natural gas. This large silver box here on the left-hand side of the studio, that's called the garage. Kind of like your garage at home. It's where we keep all of our spare parts and extra pieces. In this particular case, the head form that we just put the touches on is going to go back in there, keep it nice and hot but not workable. Brings it down to a point where the glass is stable and won't bend, but it keeps it close to a working temperature. That way when we bring it out and throw it into the rewarming chamber, it's much faster. So we're going to put that head form in there, and we're going to work on the shoulders and chest of this bust.
How's it going?
And then a little bit later, we'll assemble the 2 and put them into our big black cooling boxes that we've got on either side of the hot shop as well. You see on the screen some of Nick's previous works. You can see up here on the left-hand side, that is the general form that this stylized bust is going to take. Right here in the center bench, in that center rewarming station, Gabe has placed he's placed a mosaic kiln plate covered in Marini, which is small chunks of glass in a mosaic pattern. He's getting that up to working heat so they all stick together. While he's doing that, on the left-hand side, Nick is making a punty. He's making a blowpipe end that he will use to pick up this this kiln plate worth of glass. They'll close it all up, seal it, turn it from a tube into a bubble, and then blow it out in much the same way as we did with the head form this morning. Again, inside that reheating chamber, 2,300 degrees. Making sure that all of that glass is hot, because hot glass will only stick to hot glass. And you'll see as you come back to the bench, they're going to gently coax those pieces of glass together. Very lightly, fusing those edges. Back in for another heat, get it all nice and tacky, and continue working, sticking that together. Making sure that the blowpipe and that Marini is all the same temperature. That way we can stick them together and start rolling them up. See that? Very lightly touched. It was stuck right away. Back into the rewarming chamber so he can continue to form that from that nice flat plate he's got into a tube. Once it's in that tube form, they'll close the top, seal it in clear glass, and blow it out. Ever so gently. And then back into the rewarming chamber. Nick will repeat this process a number of times until, like I said, that Marini is stuck together in a tube. And then they continue to roll it and refine that shape. They will dip it in hot glass to seal it, and then they will blow it up into a form more like a balloon that you'd be familiar with. See Nick continually going back to that reheating chamber, making sure that all of those Marini mosaic tiles are nice and hot and stuck together. You don't have a weak point in the outside. That way it blows up like a bubble or a balloon is supposed to. You don't get any blowouts on either side. And when the piece gets sufficiently sealed, we'll close off the end of the tube, cut away some of that excess, leaving us a nice bubble on the end of that we can, as I said, coat in clear glass once or twice more, and then blow it into a balloon form. Welcome in, folks. As you guys are taking your seats, I'll take a little time now to talk about our visiting artist, Mr. Nick Mount. Nick was amongst one of the first artists to be introduced into the art glass movement in Australia in the 1970s. Grounded in the historic and cultural traditions of Venetian glass, Mount's work tells a uniquely Australian story. It's a story of partnership and persistence, industry and innovation, experimentation and growth. He has a reputation for being a generous mentor. In a career spanning almost 50 years, Nick has made significant contributions to the development of the studio glass movement in Australia and is celebrated as a master of his craft. We'd also like to thank his sponsors this week, Phyllis Griggs and Lily Warehouser, for making it possible for Nick to be here in the studio with us. Again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I will do my darndest to answer whatever you've got. So the question was, how hot is that? The glass itself is very hot, obviously. We have to keep it above 1,000 degrees, otherwise the connection point to the blowpipe and the glass will crack and we'll lose everything. But we have a couple of machines here. The center one that they keep going to, the big glowy orange one, that's the reheating chamber. That runs at 2,300 degrees for the duration of time we're in the studio. And then on the right and left side of those rewarming stations, you can see the glow around the door. Those are our crucibles, and each of those crucibles holds 1,000 pounds of liquid glass at 2,100 degrees 24/7. It is hot. Could you please put up a diagram of both the G-hole and the crucible when you get a chance? There you see up there, that's a diagram of our G-hole, the rewarming station. It uses forced air and natural gas. And like I said, keeps things inside it 2,300 degrees. And there's our furnace, 2,100 degrees, and you see that big pot of molten glass down there. That's 1,000 pounds on either side here in the studio. Yes? Huh? Sorry, still can't hear you. How does the fire make it so big? The fire doesn't necessarily make it so big. The fire heats up the glass, so then we can then blow it up like a balloon. It's the pressure on the inside that really makes it as big as it is. You see, Gabe has taken that little grinder and was addressing some of the imperfections in the glass itself, grinding those away before he gets back into the rewarming chamber. Melts everything down. They'll bring it back to the bench and take another look at it and refine that shape just a little bit more. So the question is, what is glass made out of? Most people see glass and they think sand, which is true, but we've added a couple of other agents. We've added silica. We've got, yes, what you got? It's not wax. It's got a couple other chemicals in there that make it much softer and easier to work with. The way glass is put together, you have to understand the coefficient of expansion. So your glass bottles that you get at this grocery store are much harder than the glass that they use here. They don't bend and flex as much. You think about the space shuttle, the windshield in the space shuttle is pure silica glass, and that has a melting point of about 3,000 degrees, so much hotter than what we have here in the studio. Why is there fire over there? So we have this big fluffy torch, and we use that torch to keep the outside of our glass nice and hot so it doesn't crack and ruin our efforts. How do they get the colors? The colors come from metals. So if you see white, it's usually titanium. If there's blue, it's copper. And the most expensive glass is red because they use gold as the element to color it. All right, the question is, what is the big silver thing? This is what we call the garage. The garage, like your garage at home, is where we keep all of our spare parts and extra pieces. Right now, we have some pieces that were made earlier today in there in a nice warm state. They're not soft, they're not bendy, but they're hot, so about 1,000 degrees. Keeps them from cracking, and then once they finish the balloon that they're working on out here, they're gonna stick those two pieces together. How long does it take them to cool down? That's a wonderful question. And that's a question that depends on the object itself. If you have a solid object like a glass blob, you can cool that down overnight, no problem. But if you have something with lots of spiky little tendrils hanging off of it, that can take weeks sometimes. Yeah. You have to bring it down very, very gently, because as the glass cools, it will bend and flex in different places, and you don't want it to flex one way and then snap your artwork. Yes.
I'm usually wearing glasses.
Yep.
How long would it take to...
Question is, what do they use the molten glass for? Well, in this particular case, we used a color technique called a Marini pickup. Okay? That means that the glass was colored through and through. We stuck it all together and attached it to the end of a pipe. In a lot of other circumstances, we will just take our blowpipe and dip it directly into the crucible, which will then give us the glass we need to make a bubble. Glass can also be used to seal the outside of these colors. You'll notice here, from time to time, they'll go back into the crucible, get a little extra glass on the outside, makes it, you put more glass there so you can make your object bigger. So, yes. How hot is the glass? The glass at the bench right now is above 1,000 degrees, 12 to 1,500 degrees. The crucible behind Nick over there, that's 2,100 degrees. The rewarming station is about 2,300. And then we'll have a small torch that we'll fire up here at the middle bench from time to time, and that gets up to 5,000 degrees. What are they making? That's a good question. They are in the process of making the chest and shoulders for a head form that they made earlier today. So a little bit later this afternoon, they're going to stick those two things together. That head has headphones on either side of it. Kind of cool. Yeah, it's an interesting piece. You see Ben here, he's using that metal tool called the jacks. And what he's doing is bringing together all of those colored Marini, all those colored tiles, right at the very tip of that bubble. And he's getting rid of all the excess glass that's there on the tip. So now they have a fully enclosed bubble with color all the way around. They're going to add a couple more layers of clear glass to the outside of that and then really blow it up into a larger balloon. The question is, what do they do with the glass that they just cut off? The glass, as long as it isn't contaminated, like hitting the floor or things like that, you can take the glass straight off the table or into those silver buckets over there, and we put it right back into the crucible. But if it's colored, if it's got color applications to it, dirt, things that are inside, impurities and imperfections, then we'll throw that in the trash at the end of the day. What is the pattern on the glass? Okay, that's a good question. How do you get your pattern on the glass? Now, it's kind of tough to see, but down here we have what's called kiln plates, and this kiln plate has little tiny pieces of glass squares. These are called Marini, and they are set up in that checkerboard pattern that you see down here. And we will take these plates, put them in the rewarming chamber on and off to get them all nice and hot so those glass beads will stick together. Then we roll it up. That's how we get the color on the glass today. Other times we have a glass powder that we roll our clear bubbles in. Sometimes we will shake powdered glass over the top. Sometimes we will take glass cane and write directly onto the glass. So lots of different ways to get the color on there. Yes. How long does it take? Like this particular item? This one they've been working on since about 10 o'clock this morning. It's coming in 2 large pieces. They've got the head, and like I said, they're working on the chest and shoulders. And this will take us right up to about probably 1:30, 2 o'clock maybe. So we'll see maybe 2 in a day. Yes.
Just this tiny one little shape took them since 10 o'clock.
Sure did. Yep. All right, from time to time that blowpipe gets really, really hot. So Ben has taken it over to the right-hand side of the studio and is running it through our pipe cooler. Can we see a diagram of the pipe cooler, please? And that pipe cooler is just a big bathtub, essentially, to cool down the pipe. Lets you get your hands a little bit closer to the object. Makes it easier to move it back and forth from the bench to the rewarming station. Now the tool that Ben is using now, that's called a block. Blocks are made out of wood. The question is, if wood burns, why would you use it in the glass studio? Well, the wood does something wonderful for us. It absorbs the moisture and absorbs the water of the bucket that it's sitting in. And when the hot glass comes in contact with that water, it creates a layer of steam and allows the glass object to roll very smoothly on that bed of steam, creates a very smooth finish on the outside of that bubble. You'll also see from time to time, Ben will pick up a pad of newspaper that he has sitting on that bench next to him. And it is in fact newspaper soaked in water, and it does a similar thing. It allows us to chill that glass bubble in very specific spots. So when we apply pressure blowing into the back end, that bubble will blow up in a particular direction. Yes. How do they make the glass into animals? Very carefully. I have a friend that is very great at sculpting. Me, not so much. Takes a lot of years of practice. I've done it, but I'm not very good. Generally, we don't. Yeah. So in the evenings, the studio runs a veterans outreach program, and that is one of the things that they do is their warm up before class every day. Is they either make a rose or a horse or something like that.
Pretty cool.
What you got?
This isn't related to glass, but why do you have
All right, so you notice Ben went back to that crucible, got another gather of glass over the outside of that bubble, and then he used gravity to pull all of the excess glass back into those big silver barrels. Like I said, we'll take that at the end of the day, and then we'll throw that glass back into our crucible. But here we are back at the bench. Going to use that block to shape up the form a little bit, and then we're going to start putting some breath pressure into the back part of that blowpipe and blow it out. I got a quick question for you guys. The attachment point between the glass and the blowpipe has a special name. Does anybody know what that name is? Okay, that connection point is called the moil, M-O-I-L, and that moil has to stay above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit to keep it from cracking. Because if it cracks, then we'll lose everything on the end of that pipe, and all of our work will have been for nothing. Yes. So there was a reason I asked you guys if you knew what that connection point was called. That's called the moil, remember? And from time to time, we use that big fluffy torch. We use the big fluffy torch to keep the moil above 1,000 degrees, which again keeps it from cracking and helps us to keep our object at the end of the blowpipe. So we have a wonderful means of bringing this glass or keeping our glass at a working temperature. On both sides of the studio, we have these large black boxes. Those are called annealers, and those annealers is what we use to cool our glass. So at the end of the day, when our glass is done, or when pieces of our glass are done, we'll put them in the annealer and let them cool down. That'll either allow us to take them back into the back rooms and do some cutting and polishing and shaping before we bring them out and stick them on. Or the next day we can bring them out, put them in the garage like I talked, bring them up to a working temperature, and then we can stick them together on another day. So that's what we do with the pieces that we don't finish. What is bad about what? Sorry, I couldn't hear you, buddy. Can somebody help me out? Sorry, I'm really having a hard time with it. With a bubble? Okay, what happens if you make a glass with like a bubble in the surface? Is that what you're asking? What we can do, if we don't catch it in time, we can do like we did earlier. You can take the little grinder and grind that little piece out, grind that bubble out. But most of the time, we don't have that problem. Bubbles in the surface of the glass can be an issue from time to time, but the studio team here is so good at what they do, that's not something that happens very often. The question was, is it not dangerous to not wear safety equipment? Yes. You're absolutely correct. It is dangerous not to wear safety equipment. But I will tell you that the folks that are sitting here doing this, they're using exactly what they need to right now. Sitting in front of those hot chambers is really, really tiring. So that's why they wear shorts and t-shirts. But when they get closer to the big cooling machines, the annealers, you'll see them put on large, thick gloves and sometimes a face shield to protect themselves. So they're doing exactly what they need to right now. Keeps them safe and hydrated and able to work. right, so Nick just came out of that rewarming chamber, and you saw him hang the pipe with the glass closer to the ground. Why work harder? We're using gravity to lengthen that bubble, lengthen that form, so we don't have to put as much muscle into it. Now, that being said, Ben is using those papers to help draw out that bubble form and get it a little bit closer to what the artist has envisioned for this afternoon's assembly. You notice from time to time that he keeps going back to the calipers, making sure that the scale of the chest and shoulders of this bust matches the scale of the head that is currently in the garage. What we're doing now is called a punty transfer. We're taking the object that is on one blowpipe. We've attached another blowpipe to the end of it. And using a little bit of water, we're going to create some surface cracks in the connection point on the original pipe. And then we'll use a tap of a metal tool. And those vibrations will send the surface cracks all the way through the body of the object at the connection point, leaving a nice clean break so we can work on, there you go, so we can work on the opposite end. With the way that the glass was configured before, the piece that was attached to the pipe was the last thing into the rewarming chamber and the first thing out, which means it's the coldest part of the glass. Now that we have inverted that, we have to get that cold portion back up to a working temperature, and that's why we're going to continue to go back into the reheating chamber as we draw this form out.
How many artists are here at a time?
Well, it depends. Right now, we have the studio hot shop team, which is 3 folks, and then we have our visiting artist, which is Nick here in the paint.
And
Next week, actually, the second and third week in June, we'll have a large artist collective in here. I think 6 or 7 different artists collaborating. So we've got 3 different benches that we can work. And because each one needs a team, everybody will be gainfully employed.
okay, and do they just are they working on like orders or their own work?
Right now, it's the visiting artist. So he's part of it. He won a residency here,
Okay.
and he's being sponsored by a couple of individuals. Whatever he makes here during the week, he will take home with him, minus 2 objects. One stays with the museum, and the other one goes to the sponsor.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, yeah. You notice Gabe is really focusing the energy of that rewarming chamber there to the cold part of that bust form. Once it gets up to a good working temperature, they're going to close that bubble off, blow the form up a little bit more, shape it, and then attach it to the head form that we built this morning. That'll happen a little bit later today. You notice he's using that tool called the jacks to really choke the connection point down, close it off. Then he's going to use the shears to create a little bit of a temperature differential there at the end. And with a quick tap, they'll remove that excess, leaving behind a fully enclosed bubble that they can then blow up into the form that they are working for. And back into the rewarming chamber to make sure that that connection point is completely sealed, and then back to the bench for some more work. You can see the entire team is there putting, putting effort into the base of this bust form, trying to get that nice crisp bend in the top right there. A slight puff, little bubble on the top. That will serve as the attachment point to the head form we made a little bit earlier this morning. Again, Ben's going back to pay attention to the moil with that big fluffy torch, keeping it above 1,000 degrees so it doesn't crack, causing us to lose our entire project. And very much true to Nick's style, working with some distorted geometric shapes in there. Intentionally got that big bend in the side. Adds just a little bit of flair and definitely gives a signature to the artist's piece. So you can see Ben here is addressing the surface of that object with the tungsten rod and our hot torch. The hot torch comes in at about 5,000 degrees when it's running full out. And we're using that tungsten rod because glass does not stick to it. We're using that to create a hole down into the center of this form so that when we put all the pieces together and we put them away into our cooling ovens, that all the air pressures inside will equalize and we won't have one portion that cools with more or less gas than the other. Here on the left-hand side of the studio, you see this large silver box. We call that our garage. This morning we made a head form that will be attached to this that is going to serve as the shoulder and chest of the bust. Nick is moving that head form from that garage, which holds it at about 11 to 1200 degrees, which is close to working temperature, but it's not hot enough for the glass to stick together. We keep it there so it comes up to temperature much faster. You'll see him come out of the garage with that piece and then back into the reheating chambers as we get ready to stick the two forms together. Because hot glass will only stick to hot glass. And it looks like we're getting close. See that? Quick run over to his rewarming chamber on the left side of the studio. It's kind of hard to see. But rest assured, once the pieces are up to snuff, the temperatures are about as equal as they can get them. We'll bring it back here to the center bench, and you can watch all the magic happen. We've got both of the pieces back together. I'm going to line up the holes, make sure everything is proper alignment and good temperature. And once the artist in the bench is happy with it, we'll stick those two items together and get rid of the get rid of the pipe on the opposite end of that head. Back into the rewarming chambers for both of those items. Trying to get those surface temperatures right where they need them, so that glass will stick together and we won't have a compromise. That hot torch of 5,000 degrees, giving a little extra heat there at the end. Nick's gone back in for another quick flash. All right, those two items have now come together. We're going to use a drop of water to create some surface cracks in one of those connection points, and then we'll use a metal tool to create a little bit of a vibration and separate that item from the pipe. And refine the connection point between the head and the shoulders a little bit. Here comes your water. No. You get a little bit warmer there on the moil. And here's your water. Right into that connection point. Little tap on the pipe. Boom, and we're away. That deserves a round of applause, folks. Thank you, they appreciate it. See, they're working that piece with both the hot torch and the fluffy torch. Fluffy torch on the left-hand side, keep that moil above 1,000 degrees, which will keep it from breaking. And then on the right-hand side, Ben is using that hot torch to refine some of the clear glass that is on the top of the head form. Looks like they'll be either drawing it out and trimming it off or shaping it up to form something else there. We'll get to see that happen in real time. But as you can see, it's a constant back and forth to the rewarming chamber to keep everything nice and hot and malleable.
Yeah, sorry.
So as we go back into this rewarming chamber for our last few flashes, kind of equalize the heat, you notice over on the right-hand side of the studio, Nick is putting on the fancy clothes. This is his dancing outfit, if you will. Those are heat protective garments, which is an indicator that we're getting pretty close to the end of creating this form. Soon enough, we'll be using that water trick, the temperature differential, to separate our object, our form, from the pipe. Nick will then have those protective garments on. He'll take the object and move it into our cooling oven called the annealer, where it will slowly come from about 1500 degrees down to room temperature over the course of a number of hours. The amount of time that it takes for those items to come down to room temperature depends upon the complexity of the object. Something like this may take 24 hours to cool down. Something that has more spindly ends to it may take a couple of days. We're going to equalize the temperature of the glass, making sure that it's still in a stable state before we put it away. And then we'll put it in the annealers. It'll come out in a day or two, and they'll be able to polish and cut the bottom of it and get it ready for display. Here we are with a little bit of water. Creates those surface cracks. A little tap with the tool will send those cracks all the way through the connection point, leaving it in Nick's capable hands. Big round of applause for the team there. And as they get it over to the box, put it away. Good job, team. All right, folks, and with that, we're going to do about an hour lunch. It was wonderful having you in the hot shop today. I hope to see you again sometime.